In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Wall Street was changing quickly. A new kind of energy was spreading through the markets, one fueled by corporate takeovers, mergers, and high stakes deal making that could move stock prices in dramatic ways. In that environment, risk arbitrage, also called merger arbitrage, became one of the most talked about strategies. It sounded technical and calm, but it often depended on something very simple: predicting what would happen to a company's stock price when a merger announcement became public. Ivan Boesky became one of the most famous names connected to that world. He was known as a powerful risk arbitrage trader who could place enormous bets on companies involved in potential mergers. His reputation grew not only because he made money, but because he often seemed to know, again and again, exactly where to focus and exactly when to act. People noticed patterns. Deals that were still rumors somehow became positions in his portfolio. Stocks that later jumped after announcements were often ones he had already purchased. To understand why this mattered, it helps to understand the basic structure of a merger trade. When a merger is announced, the target company's stock usually rises toward the offered price, while the acquiring company's stock may react in other ways depending on the deal. A trader who buys the target early can profit if the merger goes through. But there is a critical ethical boundary. Trading based on material, non-public information undermines fair markets. It creates a hidden advantage where the public is playing one game while a small group plays another. Boesky's rise also reflected a cultural moment. The 1980s business world celebrated boldness, speed, and ambition. There was intense competition among banks, lawyers, and investors to be first. In many circles, being in the know became a form of status. The line between sharp research and improper information sharing could blur, especially when money was flowing and reputations were being built on performance. Boesky's public image was complicated. On the one hand, he was viewed as brilliant, confident, and intensely focused. He built a firm that became a major presence in merger arbitrage. He was also known for philanthropy and for speaking to students about success. Those public appearances helped create an image of someone who had mastered the market through intelligence and discipline. Yet, underneath that image was a deeper question. How could one trader consistently anticipate sensitive corporate events that were supposed to remain confidential until officially announced? In a well-functioning market, information is released through formal channels, so all investors can react at roughly the same time. When someone repeatedly acts ahead of those announcements, investigators begin to ask whether the advantage comes from analysis or from access. This is why insider trading cases often become more than individual stories. They become windows into systems, how confidential information is handled, how incentives are structured, and how organizations respond when boundaries are tested. In Boesky's era, merger activity was booming, and with it came increased pressure on gatekeepers. Investment bankers, attorneys, consultants, and corporate insiders who had legitimate access to confidential deal information. If that information leaked, even casually, it could be converted into profit by someone ready to trade. Boesky's story, therefore, is not only about one person. It is about an era that rewarded speed, celebrated deal-making, and sometimes encouraged people to treat rules as obstacles rather than guardrails. The stage was set for a major reckoning, one that would reshape enforcement, corporate compliance, and the way Wall Street talked about ethics. And when investigators began connecting the dots, the public would soon learn that the glamorous surface of the merger boom concealed patterns that could not be explained by talent alone. As Ivan Boesky's influence grew, so did the attention around how he achieved such consistent results. In markets, extraordinary performance is always watched closely. Sometimes it comes from a genuine edge, better research, better discipline, better timing. But sometimes it comes from something less acceptable: unfair access to confidential information. The Boesky insider trading scandal became a landmark case because it revealed how information can travel through professional networks in ways that feel normal until you see the consequences. One of the most important lessons in this story is that insider trading rarely looks dramatic on the surface. It often starts as conversation, relationships, favors, and small breaches of confidentiality that gradually become habits. In deal environments, many professionals are exposed to sensitive information: upcoming acquisitions, tender offers, restructurings, and strategic plans. These details can move stock prices significantly once announced. The ethical duty of those professionals is clear: keep that information confidential until it becomes public through proper disclosure. What made the Boesky case so significant is how it highlighted the vulnerability of information gatekeeping. If even a small number of insiders leak details, a trader with capital and confidence can translate those leaks into profits. The trader does not need to invent a complex strategy. The advantage is simply knowing more earlier than everyone else. In educational terms, it is important to focus on the structure rather than the tactics. The structure looked like this: a deal develops in private. Companies and advisors discuss terms, financing, and legal steps. Information is concentrated. A limited group has access to the full picture. Incentives appear. Someone realizes that the information has value beyond the deal itself. Boundaries soften. Confidential details are shared improperly, sometimes justified as harmless. Trades occur. The market moves only later, after public announcements. This pattern is dangerous because it can be rationalized at every step. People may tell themselves, "It's just a hint," or "everyone does it," or "it's not a big deal." Those stories reduce the emotional friction of wrongdoing. Over time, the person stops seeing the information as protected and starts seeing it as a tool. Investigators ultimately began to uncover links between people in finance who had access to sensitive deal information and traders who benefited from it. This is where the public story shifts from a narrative of individual success to a narrative of network behavior. In insider trading cases, a single person rarely creates the full chain. Instead, confidential information is often passed along from one person to another, sometimes with benefits exchanged in return: money, business opportunities, social status, or future favors. The Boesky scandal also matters because it helped change public understanding of market skill. People sometimes assume that the most successful players must be the most insightful, but markets can reward many things: research, discipline, and patience, yet also unfair access. When investigators look at suspicious trading, they study timing, patterns, and relationships. If a trader repeatedly positions ahead of major announcements, the probability of coincidence becomes less convincing. Another educational angle is the role of professional identity. Many people involved in financial networks see themselves as sophisticated and capable. When someone with that identity crosses ethical lines, they may not view themselves as dishonest. Instead, they may reframe the behavior as being connected, strategic, or smart. This is one of the most common psychological risks in high-status environments: the tendency to believe that normal rules apply differently to people with exceptional ambition. Boesky's story also influenced how firms later designed compliance systems. Today, organizations build rules around restricted lists, information barriers, pre-clearance for trades, monitoring communications, and training that emphasizes fiduciary duty. Those systems exist because history showed how easily information can leak when trust is assumed rather than enforced. In a documentary style telling, the key point is not to glamorize the network, but to understand how it formed. Information flows where relationships exist. If the culture rewards results without asking questions about methods, people learn that outcomes matter more than process. If compensation systems reward short-term performance aggressively, they can unintentionally encourage rule bending. And if leaders treat compliance as paperwork rather than values, people absorb that message quickly. The Boesky case became a turning point because it demonstrated that insider trading is not merely a personal moral failure. It can be a systems failure, where confidentiality is treated casually, where incentives are imbalanced, and where professional communities normalize boundary crossing. Once investigators began pulling on those threads, the illusion of unstoppable market genius started to look more like a product of a damaged information environment. And that realization set the stage for enforcement actions that would ripple across Wall Street, changing careers, changing firm policies, and changing how the public understood fairness in financial markets. When insider trading investigations begin, they often start quietly. Regulators and investigators do not need dramatic evidence at first. They need patterns: trades placed just before announcements, unusual volumes, and repeated success that clusters around sensitive events. Over time, those patterns become questions, and those questions become subpoenas, interviews, and a deeper mapping of relationships. In the Boesky scandal, the pressure grew as investigators connected market behavior with people who had access to confidential deal information. What made the case so influential historically is that it did not remain isolated. It became part of a larger wave of enforcement that signaled a shift. Regulators were willing to pursue complex networks, not just individual traders. From an educational perspective, the key concept here is accountability in information-based markets. Securities markets depend on timely and equal access to material information. If certain participants repeatedly trade with an advantage built on secrecy, the market becomes less credible. Enforcement is therefore not merely punitive, it is meant to preserve trust. As scrutiny intensified, Boesky faced a difficult reality. Once investigators have a credible pattern and begin interviewing people around it, the circle of exposure often expands. People in professional networks may choose to protect themselves by speaking openly. When that happens, the investigation gains speed and direction. Boesky eventually entered into a legal resolution that included cooperation. In many major financial cases, cooperation becomes a central feature because it helps authorities understand the full structure of the information flow. Cooperation can be controversial in public opinion because it can look like a negotiation, but from a systems standpoint, it is one of the primary ways regulators dismantle hidden networks by turning partial information into a complete map. The Boesky case also highlighted a broader lesson. When wrongdoing becomes networked, the risk becomes shared. People sometimes believe that if they are not the one placing trades, they are safe. But in enforcement terms, the act of improperly sharing material, non-public information can itself be a serious violation of duty. Confidentiality is not a casual preference, it is a professional obligation. Another element that made this turning point so important was the public visibility. Wall Street scandals often carry symbolic weight. They influence how the public thinks about finance, and they influence how young professionals interpret the culture they are entering. When a prominent figure becomes the focus of a major case, it sends a clear message. Reputation and success do not create immunity from rules. In documentary storytelling, it is tempting to treat investigations as battles between personalities, but the educational value comes from focusing on process, detection, analysis of trading patterns around announcements, correlation, linking trading accounts, timing, and relationships, documentation, collecting phone records, meeting logs, financial transfers, and internal files, narrative building, showing that the advantage was not random, resolution, legal outcomes, penalties, and policy consequences. This is not described to teach misconduct, but to demonstrate that markets leave trails. Financial transactions are recorded. Patterns can be analyzed. Communications can be reviewed. Even when someone feels invisible in a large market, repeated behavior becomes visible to systems designed to identify anomalies. After Boesky, firms became more aware that informal information sharing could trigger enormous consequences. Compliance departments gained authority. Training became more direct. "I didn't know" became less believable as a defense because the industry's history made expectations clearer. A crucial educational point is the human cost without sensational language. Major enforcement actions can lead to lost careers, damaged reputations, financial penalties, and long-term limitations on professional activity. Even people who did not intend to become symbols can end up as examples. This is why ethics education emphasizes prevention. Once the system detects a pattern, it can be very difficult to reverse the consequences. Boesky's cooperation also became part of a broader narrative about the 1980s financial world. It contributed to investigations that reached other major figures and institutions. The result was not just a single case, but a shift in the entire atmosphere of enforcement. The market learned that authorities would pursue complex chains of information, and that silence was not always the safest choice for those involved. In the end, this phase of the story is about a turning point, a moment when Wall Street's informal culture of secrecy and special access collided with a regulatory response determined to protect fairness. The Boesky scandal helped redefine insider trading as not merely a technical violation, but a direct threat to market integrity. Some scandals fade as headlines move on. Others reshape the rules of the game. The Ivan Boesky insider trading case became one of the defining stories of modern financial enforcement because it accelerated changes in regulation, strengthened the role of compliance, and altered how market professionals talked about ethics. To understand the regulatory impact, it helps to remember what regulators are trying to protect. Markets work best when prices reflect public information and reasonable expectations, not private leaks. When a small group profits from secrets, two harmful effects occur. First, ordinary investors lose confidence that the market is fair. Second, capital allocation becomes less efficient because prices can be distorted by hidden advantages rather than transparent facts. The 1980s takeover boom intensified this problem. Merger announcements often caused significant stock movements, making confidential deal information extremely valuable. This created a constant temptation: treat information as a currency. The Boesky scandal exposed how vulnerable the system could be when confidentiality norms are weak and incentives are intense. Regulatory responses tend to evolve after major cases because they reveal real-world gaps. After high-profile insider trading enforcement in that era, lawmakers and regulators emphasized tougher penalties and stronger deterrence. The broader message was simple: if the expected reward is high, the expected cost of being caught must also be meaningful. Otherwise, the rules become optional in the minds of risk takers. But regulation alone cannot solve cultural problems. That is why the Boesky story also accelerated changes inside firms. Compliance became more than a formality. Large institutions expanded surveillance, created stricter trade approvals, and built clearer policies around restricted securities. Many firms strengthened information barriers, structures designed to limit sensitive deal information from reaching people who could misuse it. Training programs increasingly focused not only on what is illegal, but on why it is harmful. This is one of the most educational parts of the story. Systems learn from failure. The scandal showed that relying on personal integrity alone is not enough in high-pressure environments. Even good people can make poor choices when incentives are extreme and boundaries are unclear. Effective systems create friction before harm occurs. Required approvals, documentation, oversight, and monitoring. Another cultural shift was in how Wall Street discussed success. During deal booms, performance can become the only language people respect. But after a scandal, the industry is forced to confront a different metric: legitimacy. Success that depends on unfair access is fragile. It may produce wealth, but it destroys trust. And trust is the foundation that allows markets to grow. The Boesky story also influenced how the public viewed finance. When scandals become widely known, they shape the broader social contract around markets. People begin to ask whether the system favors insiders by design. In response, regulators and institutions often become more transparent, emphasizing fairness, disclosure, and enforcement to rebuild confidence. From an educational documentary lens, it's useful to highlight the concept of ethical infrastructure. Clear policies, what employees may and may not do, training, repeated education, not one-time reminders, monitoring, surveillance for suspicious patterns, escalation channels, safe ways to report concerns, leadership example, behavior at the top shapes behavior below. Without these, rules exist on paper but fail in practice. The scandal also illustrates a subtle but powerful lesson about reputation. In markets, reputation can open doors, relationships, access, capital, and credibility. But reputation built on questionable foundations can collapse quickly. And when it collapses publicly, it often affects many others: employees, partners, investors, and institutions tied to the individual's name. One of the lasting impacts of this era is that compliance became a professional discipline with real authority. Many modern compliance tools and norms, trade pre-clearance, watch lists, deal confidentiality protocols, and robust internal audits gained momentum because prior scandals made the risks impossible to ignore. The educational takeaway is not fear, but clarity. Insider trading is not a clever shortcut. It is a violation that damages market integrity. The Boesky case helped move that idea from abstract principle to concrete reality, showing that the cost of compromising fairness can be enormous and that the ripple effects can reshape an entire industry. If the Boesky scandal is remembered only as a dramatic moment in financial history, its most valuable lessons are lost. The deeper educational purpose is prevention, understanding how organizations can reduce the risk of insider trading by building healthy cultures, clear controls and strong decision-making habits. The first lesson is about red flags. Wrongdoing rarely appears as a single obvious act. It usually shows itself through patterns that feel a little unusual. A person consistently trades ahead of major announcements without a clear research basis. Profits cluster around deals where confidentiality should be strict. Someone shows unusual curiosity about transactions outside their role. Confidential information travels in casual conversations rather than formal channels. People resist documentation or avoid compliance review. In a strong ethical culture, red flags are not ignored because the person is successful. They are examined precisely because success can amplify harm. The second lesson is about decision pressure. High incentives can distort judgment. When performance is rewarded aggressively and failure is punished harshly, people may start treating rules as flexible. Healthy organizations actively manage this risk by balancing incentives and reinforcing that the process matters, not just the outcome. A third lesson is role clarity. Many confidentiality breakdowns begin with confusion. Am I allowed to share this detail? Is this already public? Does my friend really need to know? The best organizations remove ambiguity. They establish clear categories of information, clear rules about who can access it, and clear consequences for mishandling it. Compliance controls are not designed to slow business. They are designed to protect it. When employees understand that compliance is part of professional excellence, the system becomes stronger. Key controls often include restricted lists and watch lists. When a firm is involved in sensitive transactions, certain securities may be restricted. This reduces the chance that someone trades inappropriately during a deal process. Pre-clearance for personal trading. Employees may be required to request approval before trading certain securities, especially if their role exposes them to sensitive information. Information barriers. Teams working on confidential matters operate with limited information sharing. Access is controlled and documented. Surveillance and monitoring. Modern compliance uses analytics to flag unusual trading patterns. The goal is not to assume guilt, but to detect risk early. Training that explains why. Rules are more effective when employees understand the purpose, fairness, trust, and the credibility of markets. Another essential lesson is tone from leadership. Culture is shaped by what leaders praise, tolerate, and ignore. If leaders praise only profits, employees learn that results outweigh integrity. If leaders consistently reinforce ethical behavior, especially when it is inconvenient, employees learn that integrity is real. The Boesky era also shows that personal ethics can erode gradually. A person may start with small rationalizations. This detail doesn't matter. Then the boundary moves. I'll share just enough to be helpful. Then it becomes normalized. This is how business works. Prevention requires recognizing that ethical decline is often incremental, not sudden. That is why organizations encourage strong personal habits. Pause before acting on sensitive information. Ask compliance rather than guessing. Document decisions that touch confidentiality. Avoid informal information sharing outside approved channels. Treat confidentiality as a professional responsibility, not a social inconvenience. Another essential educational point is the importance of psychological safety for reporting concerns. In many cases, people notice odd patterns but stay silent because they fear backlash or being labeled disloyal. Effective organizations create channels where employees can raise concerns without fear and where reports are treated seriously and respectfully. Finally, the Boesky scandal teaches that the true cost of insider trading is not limited to penalties. It damages careers, families, institutions, and public confidence. It can also harm innocent colleagues who become associated with the wrongdoing. The ripple effect is why ethical discipline is not just personal morality, it is professional stewardship. The most practical conclusion is simple. Prevention is stronger than punishment. The best systems reduce temptation, clarify boundaries, and make ethical choices easier in moments of pressure. That is the most valuable legacy from learning from historical cases like this one. Even though the Ivan Boesky scandal belongs to a different era, its lessons remain deeply relevant because the core challenge has not changed. Markets will always reward early information, and therefore, markets must continuously protect fairness. Today, information travels faster than ever. Deals can be discussed across global teams, advisors, consultants, and technology platforms. The channels may be newer, but the ethical problem is familiar. Confidential information must remain confidential until proper disclosure. When it does not, trust breaks. A modern documentary approach highlights the continuity between then and now. In the 1980s, confidential deal information could move through phone calls, meetings, and informal relationships. Today, it can move through messages, shared documents, and digital traces. This creates both risk and opportunity. The risk is that leaks can happen quickly. The opportunity is that monitoring and auditing can detect unusual patterns more effectively than before. The Boesky story teaches an enduring principle. Fairness is not automatic, it is maintained. Regulators, exchanges, and firms constantly update their practices because markets evolve. New products, new communication methods, and new forms of data create new vulnerabilities. The educational focus should also include the difference between research and improper advantage. Modern investing values deep analysis, public filings, industry trends, financial models, and management assessment. This is legitimate and healthy. The danger comes when people substitute analysis with access and then treat that access as intelligence. In the present day, most serious organizations enforce insider trading rules through a combination of policy, technology, and culture. Clear definitions of material information and what counts as public. Mandatory training that includes real examples and practical scenarios. Electronic monitoring for unusual trades and timing clusters. controls on sensitive documents and access logs, strict consequences for confidentiality violations. Yet, systems are only as strong as the values behind them. That is why the most important legacy of the Boesky scandal may be cultural. It challenged the idea that financial success automatically equals professional legitimacy. The scandal also demonstrates how easily reputations can mislead. A person can appear generous, confident, and accomplished while still making choices that harm market integrity. This matters because modern audiences can be tempted to admire results without examining methods. The educational approach is to separate performance from ethics and to remind viewers that the method is part of the outcome. Another modern lesson is about conflict of interest and social pressure. People may feel loyalty to friends, mentors, or business partners. In some environments, refusing to share information can feel socially costly, but professional integrity often requires the courage to disappoint others in the short term to protect the system in the long term. In training contexts, compliance leaders often teach a simple rule. If you would be uncomfortable seeing your decision described publicly, pause and consult. That mindset does not rely on technical definitions alone. It relies on transparency and accountability as guiding values. A final modern insight is about rebuilding trust. Markets experience periodic scandals. Each time, the public asks whether the system is fair. Trust is rebuilt through visible enforcement, improved controls, and leadership that demonstrates seriousness about integrity. The Boesky story contributed to a time when enforcement became more assertive and compliance became more embedded in business operations. That historical shift still shapes the present. To close this documentary-style series, the key educational message is clear. Insider trading is not only a legal issue, it is a fairness issue. It undermines confidence, disadvantages ordinary investors, and distorts how markets are supposed to work. The Boesky scandal remains relevant because it shows how quickly ambition can outrun boundaries and how important it is for institutions and individuals to treat ethics as a core skill, not an optional add-on. In the long run, the most successful financial systems are not those with the most aggressive players, but those with the strongest trust. And trust is built when information is handled responsibly, rules are respected consistently, and leadership chooses integrity even when the temptation to cut corners is strong.